Hey folks, happy Wednesday. Hope everybody's doing okay. Today we're talking about the 4-year anniversary of Hurricane Florence.
Can't believe it's been 4 years.
I feel like since we had the pandemic in between, this seems just like an eternity ago.
Yeah, it does.
Years and years ago. Wow, just 4 years ago.
It does. And 2 years before that, we had another bad storm that hit a lot of the same areas.
Made landfall near Wrightsville Beach.
I know,
yeah.
I know. And I think the different thing is now, and maybe it's just, you get older in adulthood, but I think it's also, I remember specifically Florence watching the resort cams and stuff along the beach, because you can watch it when it is actually happening, and you don't have Al Roker or somebody else there putting their life at risk. You can actually see it as it happens, and for some reason with Florence, that one sticks out in my head.
Yeah, and it was just a monumental storm just because of how slow it was moving, and then that was just 4 years or 2 years after you already had the 100-year flood that came from Hurricane Matthew. Yeah. So when
we thought that was bad, and then Florence came along.
And you put together sort of a list of some of the
top 5, right?
Yeah, so I reached out to the climatology department from NC State, and we worked together in trying to find the top 5 worst floods in North Carolina history. And as you guessed it, Florence and Matthew are on the list. Here's the top 5 right now. Floods happen every year in North Carolina, but some can be catastrophic and unlike any other. Here are the 5 worst floods in North Carolina history in this week's Weather IQ. Number 5, Watauga County, August 1940. Boone saw 8 inches of rain in one day, causing thousands of landslides in the area. 20 deaths were blamed in this event, and this was the worst flood on record for the northern mountains. Number 4, mountain flooding, July 1916. 2 tropical systems drenched the mountains for a week in mid-July. The Asheville area was hit the hardest, as the French Broad River reached 5 feet above major flood stage up to 23 feet. This event holds 2 state records for rainfall in a 24-hour period and as our deadliest tropical storm. Number 3, Hurricane Floyd, September 1999. Floyd was the first hurricane to cause significant inland and freshwater flooding in North Carolina. Hurricane Dennis primed the flood threat just 2 weeks prior. Then, Floyd dumped 12 to 18 inches of rain. The historic town of Princeville was inundated with more than 20 feet of water after a levee breached. Number 2, Hurricane Matthew, October 2016. Matthew never made landfall in North Carolina, but the tropical moisture pumped in produced more than a foot of rainfall in areas like Fayetteville, who were already wet after tropical storms Hermine and Julia. The Cape Fear and Neuse rivers both reached then historic crests, and the high water mark in Kinston remains the all-time record. Number 1, Hurricane Florence, September 2018. No other event matches the extent and severity of Florence due to how long it lasted and how much it rained. Storms slowed to a snail's pace as it moved inland, dropping more than 12 inches of rainfall across the Sandhills and the southern coastal plain, with nearly 3 feet of rain in Bladen, Onslow, and Carteret counties. I-95 was completely underwater for days to weeks after the storm. All 5 of these events have one thing in common. All were derived from tropical storms and hurricanes. With WCNC Charlotte, I'm meteorologist Chris Mulcahy. So there you have it. That's your top 5 from the western side of the mountains to the east shore. And it doesn't need to be a hurricane or a tropical storm that makes landfall directly in the Carolinas. The first 2 that we were talking about in the mountains, all that happened just from tropical moisture that combined. And your grandma actually knows about 1916.
My grandmother, I remember as a little kid, we were at her barn in Rutherford County near Asheville, and she said right here the water came up to the barn. That was 40 feet above the Broad River, the French Broad River. And she said, as a little girl, she said that it flooded all of that area in Rutherford County, which is pretty close to Buncombe County near Asheville.
Yeah.
That was 1916.
That's crazy.
And as far as those rankings go, the 2 mentioned in 1940 and 1916, those are monumental. The only reason why the other ones beat it out is because it affected a much larger area in North Carolina instead of the smaller communities with that. But those 5 right there are...
Florence, I mean, devastation. I remember going down, after Florence hit, driving down to Myrtle Beach and just seeing all of the small towns. You go down Highway 9, it was just town after town had been flooded over, and all the houses completely destroyed by the flooding. They had to be abandoned. Many of those houses, even today, aren't even occupied.
Let us know what you remember of those storms, some of these storms, because some of them have been in recent years. So let us know what you remember.
Melissa Banks chiming in saying she had to get new wooden floors downstairs and a new roof after Florence. There was water everywhere.
And Larry, you probably remember this. There was at one point when Florence was finally working its way off towards the west. It was snail's pace. That for the first time in my career saw a flash flood emergency in Chesterfield County.
Yes, definitely in Chesterfield County. We'd never seen that.
Never seen that before.
When they said flash flood emergency, and yet Chesterfield County, Lancaster County, both those counties were just inundated with all the water, all the tremendous flooding they had down there along the PD River.
I remember at one point the pool in my friend's pretty much neighborhood was actually overflowing. Yes. There was that much water in Union County that much rain had come down from.
What I remember of Matthew is 2 weeks after it, we were going to go out to the beach for just a fall beach trip. Yeah. And my dad at the time, whose family's from Wrightsville, said, Ben, I don't think you guys are going to be able to get there. I was like, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. So we get about halfway down 74.
Yes.
And it's closed. And this is like 2 weeks afterwards. And I'm like, guys, it's been 2 weeks. What's the problem? And 74 was closed. And then what was typically a 3.5 hour trip ended up being like a 7 or 8 hour trip because we then had to divert into all these small towns that were still dark, that still did. And the bad thing is, and my father predicted this, GPS wasn't helpful because GPS wasn't updated about what was closed.
Yeah.
So like, we were just lost.
But you didn't make it there?
We finally made it late that night and cursing the entire way and saying, yes, Dad, you were right.
Yeah, Florence was right when I came back from maternity leave with CJ. So came back right into that, and I just remember all the flooding issues we had around town that people thought they could drive over certain areas, and I remember we constantly were saying, you know, turn around, don't drown, and covered cars that were being...
continue to do that.
Yeah, it's always an issue.
There was one situation we were on with Florence, and we were watching a school bus, I can't remember, somewhere in Union County,
with kids on it. I remember that. I remember that because as a mom, I was like, "This is not. Don't risk it.
Don't do that."
Yes, yes, yeah.
And we had 12-hour shifts that we were doing at that point rolling in. And you expected Florence to pack a powerful punch. And also, Florence is unique because no other hurricane had made a straight path directly across the Atlantic at that latitude. So it was extremely rare. It looked like it was just going to turn out to sea, and it just continued on its path. Luckily, it was downgraded from a 4 to a 1. But just like Harvey, like Dorian, like Matthew, all these storms that we're really seeing in recent history is not about the pure magnitude of the winds. It's about how slow that they're moving. And that's where you see all the rain and the devastating flooding.
Sometimes the storms aren't necessarily, there's wind damage, but really it's the amount of water, the flooding that you have. So you had Hurricane Hugo, which was really a wind event. Hurricane Florence was mainly the rain. $24 billion in damage from Hurricane
Which is the costliest hurricane, by the way, in both North and South Carolina history.
And a reminder that, at least with Florence and Matthew, those happened in September and then October. So, I mean, like, a warning to folks out there who think sometimes, oh, we're good. Clear. Like, no, absolutely not.
It just takes one. We always say that it takes one.
All right, let us know what you remember on this, the 4th anniversary of Hurricane Florence that hit the Carolina coast. Chime in and let us know what you remember, and then we'll see you back here tomorrow morning for another edition of Wake Up Charlotte to Go.
Bye, everybody.